So I'm going to set a timer for myself. Can people hear me? I have successfully turned the microphone on. Yes. I need all of the wins every day. That's one strategy for these prolonged moments is you write down a list of all of the wins. And if you have to write down that you got up today, that's a win, right? So I'm going to put my timer on. And today I thought we could look a little bit into the future because you have influence over what that future will be. Specifically, there are some elections coming up, and you get to decide who represents you, both in the state legislature and in Congress. Um, In November of 2026, there are, and we'll get into what specific offices people are running for. Current lawmakers have to decide whether they want to run again and get voters in their districts to say, yes, you can keep your job. And there are other people who are not lawmakers, but would like to be, who might be running. And maybe there's a current lawmaker that they're running against, or maybe there's nobody running in that district except for new people. And this is our opportunity to really do some work with candidates to make sure that they understand the importance and priority of issues that impact people with disabilities and family caregivers. And I'm going to go on a limb here and say that a lot of times when you make it easier for people who have the hardest time, you make it a lot easier for everybody. So disability issues are not only focused on what people think of as a small population. And by the way, people with disabilities are the largest minority population in this country. They are 25% of this population. So you are mighty. Um, and a lot of times people with disabilities might not identify as having a disability because maybe they acquire, some people are born with a disability. Some people acquire it over time due to aging or ongoing conditions. But lots of people end up being entering the category of a person with a disability. So many of the things that you know the most about, how important it is to have extra support so you can stay in your home or live independently, the ability to maybe earn more so that you don't have to stay under a certain income or asset level to get the help that you need, the need to support family caregivers who are already relied on by our systems and are doing above and beyond the work, the need for paid caregivers, the recognition that people's family structures are different, that more and more people are non-drivers. These are all issues that impact people with disabilities and older adults, but they also can impact anybody. And they should be public policy priorities. And if you address them, you would help a lot more people than just people with disabilities. So that's a little speech on how you might talk to a candidate, I suppose, who might be dismissive about why disability issues are really constituent issues, voter issues. Oops. I think if you've been following the last year and you have been paying attention to, you know, what is happening with Congress and the administration and the state lawmakers, you may have a flavor for who's elected to these offices is important because what the function of both our state legislature and the federal government is kind of twofold. They do two big things. They gather all of the tax revenue that you and I pay in, and then they decide what to do with it. And they decide how to spend that money and invest in programs or agencies or functions of government that come back to all of us. And they also make the laws, the rules by which we all agree to live by. And in our system, every one of you has a say about who is the individual who represents you, both in Congress and the US Senate and in the state legislature. And those individuals have specific areas that they represent, and everyone who lives within that area is a constituent. Okay? Constituents are the people that they are supposed to be listening to, representing their interests and their views, and advocating for. That is their role. Some of them don't see it that way, but that is the role of a representative in Congress, in the US Senate, and in the state legislature. Some of the people who live within their boundaries, some constituents, are voters. Voters are the people who determine whether or not those folks keep their job. So there is a little bit of interest to be responsive to constituents who may vote or not vote for you if you want to keep your job. But it's also important to remember they represent everybody in that district, whether or not they vote. There are people under the age of 18 who live within the district. There are people who have voted in every election or voted occasionally or who have never voted before, or this is their first time where they're old enough to vote. A representative represents them all. And what they do when they're representing can have big impacts on people's lives. They can change, repeal, make new laws, decide whether or not to fund programs important to people with disabilities, establish new programs, change programs. There's a lot of power in the government. And you also have power. As constituents, all of you, especially groups of you, can make a very strong case or impression on what issues are important to your communities and your and should be important to your elected lawmaker. You will find, and I'm a little bit of a special case because I work with lots of lawmakers. You will find that there are relatively few elected officials that have your expertise and experience. That may not be a surprise to all of you, but it's worth saying out loud because many of the people who choose to run for office come from similar backgrounds. They tend to be people who have attained more education or are a certain age or have the ability to run for office. And a lot of those people may or may not know anything about Medicaid or the way that we have designed our current system to support people with disabilities or the gaps that exist within those systems and the stress on people with disabilities and family caregivers to try and figure out how do we make our lives work in a system that is hard and doesn't need to be as hard. So you have a really important role in helping educate lawmakers on stuff they don't know anything about. And to be clear, I'm going to be respectful of lawmakers. It's a big deal to suddenly get a job where you're responsible for billions of dollars of tax money and like you're the reviser of statute. You can't be expected to know everything. Oftentimes constituents are the consultants that good legislators use to test out different ideas. The other important role constituents have is to hold legislators accountable. And holding them accountable is not only at the ballot box. We have an election coming up where you will be able to potentially choose the same or a different person to represent you in both the state and the federal at the federal level. But accountability is year round. Watch what your legislator does. Watch what they don't do. Watch what they say. Watch what they don't say and tell them about it. Okay? Accountability is all year round. Legislators always have choices. They can choose to introduce a bill. They choose the content of that bill, whether it's a good idea or a bad idea. They choose what bills to put their names on as supporters. They choose how they vote. They choose to be silent. They choose to say something. Okay. These are all choices. And, you know, not everybody likes it when we judge other folks' choices, but you ran for office. So there's the job. And you get to be held accountable by people who are watching your choices. All right. So, what positions are we talking about in the next election? So, Wisconsin has 8 members of the U.S. House of Representatives. All of them are up for reelection in the next year. You might remember that we have 2 U.S. senators. Neither one of them is up for reelection this cycle. Last cycle, we had 1 senator that was up for reelection, and I believe the next cycle is when the other U.S. Senate position is up. Senators have 6-year terms, and about a third of the U.S. Senate is up for reelection at any given time. So Wisconsin doesn't have a Senate seat up for reelection this time, but all 8 U.S. House of Representatives are up. They have 2-year terms. We have a gubernatorial, that's the fancy word, gubernatorial election this coming cycle. The governor is an important person within the state. It's a 4-year term. And just kind of like the president, it's a similar function. He's the chief executive of the state, he or she, and determines, what is the initial budget proposal. He has veto power of bills that come to the desk that have passed the legislature on whether to say yes, they should be law, or no, they shouldn't be. Wisconsin's governor has a pretty expansive veto power over the state budget, which is a $50 billion per year little package of things. It's the biggest bill the state legislature does. And more importantly, the governor appoints all sorts of leadership positions in the various state agencies, such as the Department of Health Services and the Department of Transportation, and we can name several others. And those positions and the policy direction the governor sets really influence how programs run or how they're changed. Because we've had so much change at the federal level, and I expect that that will continue to be true, states are going to have a really important role, not only in the next year, but beyond, in deciding how they respond to those changes. So that governor's position becomes really, really important in terms of how are we implementing Medicaid work requirements? What kind of systems are we investing in to make sure that we're being accurate or not? Are we going to do SNAP as a state, or are we going to say, no, it's not worth it? Those are the kinds of things that a governor might be in a position to decide. And at the state legislature, again, all 99 of our assembly representatives are up for reelection. That's always the case. They have 2-year terms. And if you live state Senate has 33 members, so a little over half of our state senators are up for reelection in odd-numbered districts. I don't expect you will know offhand whether you are in District 1 or 2 or all the way up through 33, but that's the way we elect in the state, is that the Senate has 4-year terms, but half the Senate's up for reelection at one time, and the next cycle the other half is. So it happens to be the odd number districts this time. Candidates are starting to announce, in some cases, that they're running now. You may have noticed a whole bunch of people have already said they want to run for governor on both sides of the aisle. There are at least 2 Republican candidates, and I can't keep track of how many Democratic candidates there are. There are also some people who are not elected who want to run for office who are announcing early. A lot of times they're trying to organize and get their name out there, maybe do some fundraising. We will start seeing in December, probably December and January, people who are in office now sometimes announce early that they're not running again. So you will get a clearer picture as the spring progresses. And in May, everybody has to have paperwork in. They have to get signatures and do a whole bunch of things to get on the ballot. So by May, we will absolutely know who is in fact running for a seat in all of these races. And the primary is August 11th. So in some places, you may have 2 or more people running to be the Democratic nominee, or you may have many people running to be the Republican nominee, or you may have, one party that's running and there's no candidate from the other party, but there might be a primary. The primary decides who will be the final choice in November. So who will be the Democrat candidate and who will be the Republican candidate that people in November will vote for and will win the seat. Okay. All of this is a long way of saying there's a lot of time between now and then, and a lot of time for people like yourself to engage with candidates and figure out what they know, what they don't know. What are their ideas, if they have any, because they might not. And maybe you have some ideas. You can give those freely. Maybe they will like some of them and they will talk about them. And if they do have ideas, do they really reflect the challenges that you face in your daily life? And would those ideas help or not? Because there are folks that sometimes think they know about disability issues, but they may not come from the same perspective you have. And I have heard a lot of things in the state legislature talked about as being a good disability policy. And some of them are well-meaning, but they're also talking about disability as it was thought of in the 1970s and not of today. So just be prepared that there can be people who feel like they are doing things that are good for people with disabilities that you might not think are a good idea at all. And part of what you are doing as a constituent is challenging that. Right now, candidates are trying to figure out a number of things. They're gathering information about what's important to potential constituents. Those are the people who are also potential voters. And it's giving them information about what is it that I talk about that I think could be appealing to a lot of people, and how do I say it in a way that people get what I'm saying and agree with me and want to vote for me. So it's persuasive. They're hearing what you're saying, but they're trying to filter it through, what does it mean? Is this an issue that I think will be appealing to a lot of folks? Which is why I started this presentation by saying a lot of the things that are really important to people with disabilities are actually really important to everybody. Sometimes I hear lawmakers talk about caregiving, and what they are talking about is really childcare. That is important. It's absolutely important. It's also two sides of the same coin. And when you think about how many families are doing elder care, child care, and care for people with disabilities at the same time, you realize that it isn't useful for that representative to only focus on childcare as being like, if I fix this, then everything's okay. Well, no, there's all sorts of different needs out there, and it's the same needs. It's just for different groups of people. So you can always ask a lot of questions, and this is actually a good time. If you have candidates that's announced early, they got nothing to do right now. Their schedules are clear, and they should want to meet with folks who are in their districts. If they don't want to meet with you, I guess that gives you an impression. doesn't it? So if you're part of local groups or part of, you have a number of families, you get a plan together, you invite the candidates, spend some time with them and keep spending time with them. It's not one and done. Um, so there are a number of folks that are already elected, right? And how do you evaluate the job that they have been doing? That's a question I get a lot. I haven't put in a whole bunch of slides on like where to go on the websites, but I think you can get a pretty good sense of people, even just through a conversation. What bills have they introduced, if any? How many have they said, I'm the lead person on it? This is my idea, and I'm trying to get my other fellow lawmakers to sign on to it with me. That shows initiative. That shows that's what they're prioritizing with their time as an elected official to advance. What kinds of bills have they co-sponsored? In other words, added their name to and said, I support this. Okay? Doesn't matter if they've gone very far or not. It gives you a good sense of, have they done any bills that are focused on disability? The bills that they've done, have they made it easier or harder for people with disabilities? They may try and sell you on it, but look at what have they actually done. You will find that there are some members who have been elected who haven't done much. I have been around a long time now. And this session, I will tell you, at least in the state legislature and in Congress, has been one of the slowest that there's been on record. The fewest number of bills have been introduced, the least amount of session days. There isn't a lot of work going on. So that's a question to ask. Because you're putting somebody in a seat to do stuff. They have a lot of power to do stuff. And if they're not going to do stuff, I don't know. Some other things to think about. We've had a lot of different changes at the federal level. Do they have any positions on that? There's been $1 trillion of Medicaid cuts over the next 10 years. There's been cuts to the SNAP program. There's a government shutdown. There's a lot of administration changes. It may be a good opportunity to educate them, because what I find is that a lot of lawmakers have a very narrow perspective of who is actually in these programs. When I say the word Medicaid, for example, I mean the 21 programs that are funded by Medicaid dollars, right? And those dollars are actually paying the people who have already done the work. That's how Medicaid works. When a lawmaker hears Medicaid, they hear Badger Care. And there are lots of people with disabilities who are in Badger Care, but there are also a lot of people with disabilities who are in MAP and Family Care and IRIS and other programs. And they don't know much about home and community-based long-term care. When they think about long-term care, they think about nursing homes and paying nursing homes more, or paying more staffing for nursing homes. And it's often, they forget that the home and community-based system that keeps people out of expensive nursing homes exists too. So this is a good opportunity to kind of tease out, what do they think the impact of those cuts is going to be? They may not know. They may not know all of the information you already know because you've been following it for the last year. And yet these are the people who are probably going to have to make decisions the next budget cycle about what to do when there's less federal money coming in, what to prioritize, which places get funding or not. Other things to think about when you're kind of assessing whether the person who's currently holding the position should keep his job or move on. What have they said publicly? Now, you don't have to attend a bunch of in-person events to get a picture of what your lawmaker is thinking about. A lot of them are putting out press statements. They all have social media accounts, and I encourage people to sign up for your lawmakers newsletter. They all have one. They all have social media accounts. Follow those accounts because they have those things as communication tools for their constituents and beyond. And they often are posting their own press releases on their web pages and other places. What have they said about disability and caregiver issues? It could be nothing. Or it could be they have talked about caregiver issues, but maybe it's only childcare. Okay. Or maybe they've gotten into the weeds about I'm reforming the MAP program so people can earn more, and they have like a 15-page policy plan. There's one guy. And what have they said publicly about cuts to federal programs that you think are important to people with disabilities? One of the tragedies our lawmaker and this tragedy is my word. Lawmakers really don't understand how Medicaid works. They do not understand that people have to be, at least in long-term home and community-based long-term care, they do not understand that you have to be poor forever in order to qualify to get the care you need. That is a requirement. They do not understand that it's 100% of the federal poverty level and less than $2,000 in assets. Otherwise, you're not eligible for family care or IRIS. They don't get that. And they also don't get that that when you make poverty a prerequisite for one program, you also end up having a population of people that is eligible for a whole bunch of other programs that require poverty. So sometimes you might hear, oh, we aren't going to hurt people with disabilities. Well, you are, but you won't know it. So, okay, somebody who's in Medicaid may also be in food share, may also have housing assistance, may also, and go on, right? And sometimes legislators really need people who have kind of figured out how to cobble together all of these pieces of assistance to make a life that works in order to understand that one impact on one program actually matters across the whole thing. Okay. Because they really don't understand that. So, they may say something like, well, the federal Medicaid cuts are, they're a long way away. They won't impact people with disabilities. You all know better, so you can educate them on that. But it's coming from a place of non-knowledge, right? They just don't have a sense of who's in these programs and where the cost is. And I think that there's a lot to learn about, what do they understand their role as if you're a state elected official, what do they understand is going to happen when these federal cuts are coming? Because they may not understand that they get to be the ones that are on the hook for a bunch of decisions that might hurt people that they might not like very much. And if they haven't said anything this year about your disability caregiver issues, it's a good question. Why not? What do they think about people with disabilities in general and their priorities? Do they not see disability priorities as being irrelevant to other constituents as well? What are they going to do if they're elected if they say they want to protect people with disabilities? Well, what are you going to do to make sure that that's true? New candidates, fresh meat. Some of these questions are very similar, but they're important in the sense that new candidates don't have a legislative record to point to often. Sometimes you'll have a candidate that has been like a county, board member, or, like they come from some level of government, but that isn't necessarily true. So all they have is their words right now. All they have is their ideas and their promises and their talking points to convince people that constituents should become voters and those voters should vote for them because their message and what they plan to do is better than what the current person who's already in office has done. Okay? So you can listen to what they're saying, look at all of their social media accounts, their websites. They're trying to get their message out there. So they're trying to project communication and messaging to people who could potentially vote for them. What they're saying or not saying publicly really does give you an impression of what they perceive to be important or not important. And I think the other piece is, are they willing to meet with you? Do they think of you as a group of potential voters or donors who is important enough to do some real work for? And sometimes candidates haven't learned how to respond to people in ways that isn't going to come back to bite them, right? So some of you may approach a candidate and maybe you get a response that isn't great. Make sure you talk about it with all your friends. I'm serious about this. You are a big community in this room. You have been a big community all this year and before, because we've passed things, right? We've got the Americans with Disabilities Act. We've had major legislative victories. This is just our time. I wish we were doing more proactive stuff, but here we are. Their responses really tell you something. And you should make sure they know that you're not a one-off. That when you or your group or your set of families is talking about issues that broadly our community would say are important. And I think we have a pretty good sense as our organization about what those issues are in broad strokes. They should know it's not just you. They should know that you're representing a huge group of people that live in their district that is sharing those same issues, and you can introduce them to more. Okay? Survival Coalition actually kind of thought about this and put together a list of questions for candidates. And you can use your own questions. Maybe we'll have some time at the end and you can add and revise them. And these questions can be used for any candidate running for office. You can see where they're going, right? How do you guarantee that I'm going to get the help I need to remain in my home? How are you going to make sure I don't get forced into an expensive Medicaid-funded institution? Why do I say expensive Medicaid-funded institution? Because most legislators don't understand that nursing homes are funded by Medicaid too, and they're $14,000 a month. Okay, so you can work in your education in a lot of ways, trying to make sure that they understand there's a choice here and that they have agency about what to do. How are you going to make sure there are paid caregivers? That isn't only a home and community-based problem. That is also a facility issue. There aren't enough bodies to do the care. And what often happens from a family caregiver perspective is that our system relies on family caregivers already now very heavily. And a lot of those family caregivers are aging. There is a point in time where you cannot do the same level of care forever or at all. So when I say we have a pulse as an organization, the last 2 to 4 years, I think one of the things we hear about most clearly that is a new issue is housing. Because people are thinking about what's the next step, what's the future, and they're not talking about, I would like to send my child to a group home. They're not talking about, I want to send the person I've been caring for to an institution or a nursing home. They're talking about something else. And yet what's in lawmakers' minds and what they're familiar with and the habit are all of the things that people say they don't want to be their future. Caregiver shortage is a big conversation point. A lot of lawmakers may not realize how much care families are already doing. There's this idea that families aren't doing enough, and you can say bull and give them examples. We have a lot of lawmakers, and I talked about this a little this morning, who don't know how hard it is to get and stay in some of these programs that people need. I always talk about Medicaid, home and community-based care, family care, and IRIS, as these are the things that people need, and they can't get it anywhere else but Medicaid. They cannot. There's no private insurance. Medicare doesn't cover it. Most lawmakers don't know that, and it's really hard to get in. They seem to think, and part of the hearing we had this spring kind of showed them that they were wrong. They seem to think it's a really easy process to apply for and get and renew Medicaid. And I see a lot of heads going and eyes rolling. I'm with you, right? It takes a lot of work to gather all of the documents to make sure the forms are filled out right. You're working with county workers who have expertise in this issue, and you're doing it every year. Other questions Survival Coalition has put forward. I'm sure some of you have been following the recent changes at the U.S. Department of Education, where they have eliminated the Office of Special Education and Rehabilitation Services, and the workers who had the expertise in those programs have been fired. Lots of IDEA as a law still is on the books. States are still supposed to implement it. But the federal agency is where the buck stops. When people didn't get what they needed at the state, that was the place that you went. When states have questions, that's where you went. The money that the federal government gives to states to help implement IDEA is managed by those folks. So it's important to, now that kind of no one's minding the store anymore, at least in this moment, all states, will they have the same ideas on how to educate students with disability? Will they implement the federal law with fidelity? Or will they say, you know, these students are expensive and we will do what the minimum is, or we know no one's watching. So what will we do? I don't think that most candidates or lawmakers understand that. And of course, IDEA is only applicable in public schools. It requires public schools to accept students with disabilities. It guarantees you the right to a free and public education. That is not true in private schools. So public schools become the default place. That's where you get a guarantee to education, not elsewhere. Other questions, again, we've talked about housing. Did you know that DOT has done some nice mapping with census data and other things? We've discovered without much trouble that there's about 30% of our population that are non-drivers. And that number is growing, by the way, for lots of reasons. First of all, older drivers sometimes age out of driving or reduce their driving before they give up their license. There are more younger people who are never getting a license or are prolonging when they get a license. And some of that is because of lifestyle choices, but some of it is also because cars are expensive. And so is insurance, and so is maintaining them. And it has become an item that many younger drivers cannot afford. Non-drivers include kids, but kids still have places to go and they need somebody to take them. And that's hard when there's no public transportation and you're again, a family caregiver issue. How many family caregivers are spending their time shuttling people to medical appointments, et cetera? So this is again, a big disability issue. One of the things I hear about the most, but it is a general big population issue. And the other questions, there's been a lot of activity on access to voting ballots. Disability community has been focused on voting issues because we realize, and this is true of older adults as well, that we have lots of people who are non-drivers, who may not be able to get to a specific place at a specific time, who have caregiving responsibilities that may turn into crisis at a moment's notice. And there's been lots of both state legislation and talk at the federal level of limiting some of those options. So it's important that people who are running for office understand what that might mean. So for state lawmakers, I don't want to be too repetitive, but try and get a sense. How are they going to figure out when these federal cuts come, what they're going to do about it? Do they know that they're going to have to be the ones who take hard votes? And what are they willing to cut? How are those state lawmakers going to engage with their federal colleagues to tell them about what's happening to their state and their districts and what kinds of impacts are occurring because of decisions made at the federal level? And how are they asking their federal colleagues, how are you going to make sure that disability laws are followed if you're taking out the people who enforce it at the federal level? And lastly, again, that messaging piece, expect communication. How many of them, what are they going to use? When you have an elected position, you automatically are handed a microphone. People want to talk to you just because you're the guy or gal that represents the area, right? You're automatically newsworthy. What you say carries more weight. Now, I have to tell you, the people in this room who have done a lot of media work, you have made yourselves important, so I don't want to sell you short. Maybe some of you should run for office because you seem to know how to do this pretty well. But what they choose to say or not say is important. And I don't know how many of you have been listening for reaction or responses or messages that reflect what you're seeing and you're feeling when you see what changes are happening at the federal level from your state lawmakers. I have not seen a lot of discussion of the issues that we're all discussing in public from our current lawmakers. And that's just an observation. Maybe you have locally. But I think it's important. I think it's important to outline the expectation of, we expect you to be talking about not only doing something about the issues that are important to us in our community and that are largely important to everybody, but we expect you to be saying something publicly, both with promoting new ideas that would be helpful and also calling out ideas that aren't. And for our federal friends, we have 8 U.S. House of Representative folks running. People who are running for federal office are running for the opportunity to make decisions on how the federal government spends their money and what changes to laws are made. So it is a perfectly appropriate question to ask them, what are they going to do about undoing cuts or investing in programs important to people with disabilities? And what are they going to do to prevent changes that are going to have an undue impact on people with disabilities and family caregivers in the state? And I'm going to flip back to that. I was asked to say how to keep up, and I ran out of steam. Sorry, guys. You can always follow our email list if you're not already signed up. We do send out periodic action alerts. We will be we have a lot of information that we try and post on our social media accounts, and we're everywhere. We are continuing to do our Friday webinars. I may take a break when Congress goes home, and then we'll probably have to come back in January. We have to do a registration every week because of Zoom bombing. So it's a little bit annoying that people have to keep signing up, but we do, if you can't attend, don't worry about it. We send out a recording and the slides afterwards. And yes, you are free to use that information as you will. So I'm going to stop talking now. Can I go backwards? Oh no. I can only go forward. Well, that's typical. Maybe I can only go forward. The slide I was trying to go back to, which what are the questions you have for your list? Oh, and I got done 4 seconds before my timer went out. That is another win. 2 wins today. All right, I'm going to pass the microphone around. You can have some time. You've got paper at your stations. What are some of the questions that you have or that you might want to ask candidates? First of all, who wants to run for office? There you go. All right, we got one. Perfect. She's crowdsourcing right now. So give her good ideas.
So hearing people go with groups of people to talk to their legislators. What about for those of us that are deaf? How will I have access to those people and be able to ask them questions and share my story?
Accommodations. Be assertive. You are a constituent too and a voter who happens to not have full hearing. And there are plenty of ways to connect with your legislator that says you might send them a written message and say, I would like to meet with you about these issues. And do these dates work with you? I am hearing impaired. I will have an interpreter. Take and also make sure that your legislator understands that that is something that you need. Many legislators have really never been in a position where they've interacted with a person with a disability as an equal, right? They will not think about accessibility automatically, but you can help them learn that they should. Okay. And being an active constituent with a disability is an important way to build that relationship with the lawmaker and help them understand that they need to build into their communication and their public events the ability for everybody to communicate. I will make a slightly partisan statement not partisan. Under the Biden administration, there was a real shift to provide ASL interpretation, for example, in all major events. And it was very prominent and very clear, and it was a change because that had not happened before. That change has reverted back to the old pattern. That doesn't mean that deaf people went away or that they aren't constituents or that they aren't voters. It means that this group of people does not see it as a priority to make sure that they are heard and truly understood by everyone. So you need to make it a priority to make it their priority and force them to understand, I have something to say and that I am not the only one in my community that has these needs, and you need to listen to us.
For the cutting part out, you have a PowerPoint for that.
Do I have a plan for what?
PowerPoint.
A PowerPoint? This one? Yes, this session is being recorded and you should get the PowerPoint from it.
Okay, I think weekly but for funding para.
Oh, the weekly version of Friday. Yes. We have oh, hey, look at that. We have recently, we're trying our best. We've recently tried on our website. We're trying to archive past Friday webinars so that people can go to our website and go back at least a few weeks. So yes, you can get all of that. That is our way to try and help people get that material, even if they haven't signed up or they've forgotten to. If you sign up and register, then an email will come directly to you with the slides and all the links in the presentation and the recordings.
Thank you, Kathy.
Yep.
I'm finding when I'm talking to some of my legislators that when I ask them a question on the phone, they will refer me to their website. So I have proactively said, I saw this on your website. So can you give me more details about this? So
Smart advocate. That's a great tip and a great strategy. First of all, it communicates that you've already been there. You've already seen what they had to say and found it wanting. Who does know?
yes.
Think about the crabbiest mom you know who is pursuing customer service in a way that would be uncomfortable. Okay? You don't need to be rude, but I have seen middle-aged Midwestern moms be some of the most assertive people I have ever seen when it comes to like decoding a bill issue or other things. Like, be that way with your elected official too. They do work for you. You don't need to be mean or have a bad relationship for them, but this is part of the accountability that constituents have. And what you're saying is the information on your website is not sufficient. You've made a general statement here that I don't understand or that doesn't tell me what I need to know. Here is what I need to know. You're saying you don't know. Who does know? If it's not the representative, who's telling you what to say? That's a little rude. But what is the position of, if you don't have a position on this, let's set up a meeting to talk about this issue, because we have a lot of solid ideas about what we think your position should be, right? And how it impacts your constituents. And how can we work with you and help you to find other friends on this issue? See, that's the nice side of me coming back. Okay. Other tips and suggestions. That was great, Erin. You always have lots of insights.
Yeah, maybe 10-year plan, but I guess you already hit it. They work for us, and that's one thing that really helped me, I'd say, in the last 10 years in my advocacy journey, is remembering that, because sometimes it's scary to sit in front of them, whether it be in their office or when you're talking to them. I often in the beginning found myself wondering if I was, why am I calling? What do I know? And I've really realized that I know quite a bit in what I'm talking about, right? I'm not calling them about something that I'm not educated in. But what I often start with is my story, my disability journey. And I know, we all have a different one, but mine started at a younger age. And so I really go through my whole life cycle with them to see if I can hit something, whether it be they have a child, they have aging parents, maybe they're a veteran and have sustained some sort of disability themselves. And I actually found last year with someone that I didn't think that I would connect with, that I hit a nerve in a good way, that they were like, oh, I've never thought of it in that way. And so sometimes it's just a matter of sharing my own personal story, not always, but sometimes, to get them to take a broader look and open their perspective to things.
It is about creating a relationship, and a positive relationship, because this is not a person, if you're investing time into them, if they're a candidate, and you're going to invest time into whomever is the elected official at the end of the day, because you need them to work for you in a way that works for you. And I do think that most people don't run. I have never met a person who has run for office who has gone, you know what? I want to hurt people. That's why I'm running for elected office. Most people, especially citizen legislators, they're running for office because they have a vision or an idea that they think is true, and maybe they are right or wrong in that, or they want to do some good work. It is ultimately public service. And a lot of times, your role, especially as a disability or family caregiver constituent, is going to be connecting the dots for them. So yes, you can establish credibility in a few sentences and talk and connect, hey, I had a hard time getting here today because, there's only one accessible entrance, for example, right? But it's also about connecting the dots that the issues that impact this older adult person over here are also relevant to this population of people with disabilities, or people who are trying to push strollers down the road, those types of things. And a lot of your work is really educating and helping connect those dots. Legislators come to the building, federal and state, with a whole range of experience. And they're asked to do a big job. They're asked to be kind of taking votes on anything that may come their way, right? So there are people who come in who are farmers and have a lot of expertise in agriculture. They may not be your tax guys, you know? And there are not very many people who are coming in with disability experience or are coming in with social service experience. There tend to be a lot of folks that have legal experience that are drawn to these fields, or small business or bigger business owners. There tend to be some folks that have participated in different industries. We've had folks that have trucking experience, for example, or have been grocers. Like lots of different experience. But in terms of the programs that people with disabilities use a lot, they tend not to be people who have come from backgrounds where they've themselves have been people who are, say, using SNAP or using Medicaid. There are a couple in our state legislature, and they do have very different perspectives because of that. But that's not the deal. Your role as connecting the dots is really important for them because they just don't know.
I said, I'm afraid to ask the question I have. Our country really is broke. It is well over $120,000 on each one of us to pay to the government to just bring this country on even space, no debt. That money are not there. The question is how, as a country, we can still provide for our citizens when we have such a mounting debt.
It's a good question. Government collects tax revenue and they're deciding what to spend it on. We have a system that exists now, and this is really important for everybody to hear. Everything that you know now can be changed. Changed simply means different. It can be changed to be better. It can be changed to be worse. All of these things are choices. Even the Constitution can be changed. It's amount of effort that's required to make the change. And I don't disagree with you in the sense that you either have to increase the amount of revenue coming in, or you have to change what it is that you are doing. And those choices will impact different people different ways. The bill that was signed into law on July 4th primarily made cuts that impact people who are already in poverty the most, and it gave tax breaks to people who are earning significantly more. That is simply a fact of that bill. Now, if you could make a whole different set of choices, right? You could choose to raise revenue. You could choose to change how the system works. Why is it that you have to be in perpetual poverty forever if you're a person with intellectual and developmental disabilities to access home and community-based long-term care? Why? Because we've made the rules that way. What if we didn't? What if every time there is a moment where there is extreme change that is negative, there's also the opportunity for rethinking how we do things and making it so it's less hard or less punitive. Maybe private insurance should cover some home community-based services. Maybe Medicare should. Maybe we should change our health system more radically. Maybe people with intellectual and developmental disabilities that have long-term care needs should be able to access home and community-based care, and somewhat like the MAP program, pay a sliding scale. Maybe there shouldn't be income limits on those folks. There's a lot of ways you can think about our current system differently. And in a way that makes it less expensive and also does more of what people want, right? Where do we invest? What services do we invest in? Institutional services are still mandatory under Medicaid law. Home and community-based services aren't. I only point that out as an example of you're spending a lot of money in a very fixed way on certain things. You could shift the emphasis on where you spend the money to spend it on services that cost less. That's another way of changing the system and also reducing the budget. One thing that I think your question is getting at is the current system that we have right now does really require certain groups of people to always be economically low income and very dependent on the continuation of those programs in the exact form they are now.
Money you can actually squeeze out from that group as well.
Not from the middle average taxpayers. And you're getting into a philosophical debate, right? Because there are many people who earn a lot more. And it's too simplistic to just say, oh, well, we'll just take more money from there's a lot of things that you could change. One thing that is clear is that we have many people who are on fixed incomes. And that includes a lot of older adults. About a quarter of the people in this country are reliant on Social Security alone as their sole income in retirement. So all of those stressors that you just identified, housing costs going up, food costs going up, healthcare costs going up, for people who are on fixed incomes that cannot be increased, they are the least likely people who are able to absorb those costs. And what you're saying is there's a much bigger group of people who are doing much better than the folks at the poverty line who are also not finding it easy to afford things. I'm not sure I answered your question, except to say that, there's choices being made, and those choices have long-term consequences, and choices get made on backs of other choices. We didn't end up with this kind of debt because, it didn't just happen now. It happened over a long time. Well, and the question lawmakers all have to contend with is who is it worth spending money on, right? And I don't mean it to come out quite that stark, but I do think that how we decide to spend money and who it impacts the most does tell us something about who we think is the most worthy to invest in. Why are they changed? I think I understand your question. Under federal Medicaid law, there are certain services that states have to pay for. Institutional services is among them. There are about 8 core services. There are a lot of other Medicaid services, including home and community-based services and prescriptions, by the way, that Medicaid law says states can do, but they don't have to. They're called optional services. Okay? So we are required to spend money on the highest cost things, institutional services, but we're not required to spend money on the services that keep people out of those higher cost settings. And many watchers say that with the scale of Medicaid cuts that are coming, it is more likely than not that states will look at their optional services, things they don't have to do, and say, this is a place that we can reduce our spending because we have to spend money over here. And unfortunately, home and community-based services are a big ticket item because the people who are in those services tend to need a lot of care, and that means they are more expensive. So that is a high cost optional service that many people are worried about might be looked at as a place where states, if they need to reduce how much money they spend in Medicaid, will look to first to make cuts. That was your question, I think, right?
Yeah.
Maybe more than what you asked for. Okay. I don't need to keep standing up here. So if you don't have questions or need to leave the room or want to get candy or water or whatever, don't feel bad about leaving. But thank you for the 10-minute time check. I'm just happy I had 3 seconds left. How about we flip it? For the last 10 minutes or however long people want to stay, what are the things that you are most worried about? And think about that in terms of what would you want, like the things you are most worried about are things that you would want to communicate with some urgency to a candidate or a lawmaker. Pay attention to this.
As we know, sometimes change can take a long time. And so for me personally, I am a 40-year-old mother with a physical disability, right? Every year I age, it's just what happens. And I think that my biggest fear is if I lose my independence, if I lose the ability to do my own self-cares, then what? I probably at this point have too many assets and, all of those things that would trickle down. And so my fear is that I either would have to get rid of a lot of the things that I've worked very, very hard for, or I wouldn't have the ability to hire a caregiver if I would need to for somebody to take care of me because I don't have some of those community supports that are built in. So I think that for me personally, that would be my fear. And then also, depending on how that trickles down, my son is still a minor. And so making sure that his needs are met as well, along with that, because life can change in the blink of an eye. And so that's always kind of an overarching fear of mine.
Yep. Yeah, that's a good, actually a really good thing to bring to legislators' attention because they often don't understand that there are many people with disabilities who have been very successful, right? And have done all of the things. And that's especially true for people who acquire disabilities or have changing conditions over time, especially in that 40 to 55 year age range. Should you have to lose it all to be able to be poor enough to get on Medicaid? Because that's the only place you can get a caregiver if you can't afford to private pay. I mean, I think that is a really great example for legislators. And quite frankly, that is the thing that they will be dealing with their aging parents. It is the same issue. Yep. Yep.
30, 40, 50 years of
Hmm.
work.
Just because you need a little more care. Yeah. Good. Other contributions?
Being a disabled special ed teacher, I'm concerned about the cuts to special education. And I know, especially in my district, like we already are in debt. And so I don't know how we would make up those funds.
Yeah. So continued uncertainty. Hmm.
And I guess the other piece is we fought so hard in our history. We fought so hard for the rights that we have currently. I say that loosely. And we're seeing them being stripped in a way. And in my world, in my future world, I thought that we would be fighting for more, right? And instead, we're almost backtracking and trying to keep the rights that we currently have, therefore being able to focus on those other things. And we all know that the ADA is the floor. It's been the floor for many years. It is definitely not the ceiling. And we haven't even been able to start our trek into building to get to this ceiling because of how hard we're continuing to fight for the basic rights that we have currently. And so that's the other thing is it's scary sometimes to be those people advocating, to be fighting for our rights, especially in these times. And so that would be that other piece is to ensure that the rights that we currently have, we continue to have, but also that we understand that we are at the floor and we need to still continue to fight to be higher and to get more.
Well said. Oh,
Kind of going a little bit off of what a few people have said is there are disabled people with great success stories. How do we as advocates for them and we see these young adults with disabilities and getting them ambitious to succeed and to do these things because what are they hearing from, well, we got to get your money down, you're going to lose your funding. Well, then where does come their ambition to do, be successful, make that money? Oh, I'm going to lose my housing. You mean I'm not going to be able to live here? I'm not, it's just sad to see that.
yeah. And I think you're talking about something very basic. We're here. We've always been here. We've always been part of the community. We want to contribute as much as we can. And the rules and the things that you've put in place are making it really hard to do that. And for everyone. And it isn't about who is more or less disabled. It's about how do you help make it easier for people to participate and figure it out and want.
To put that into perspective of a lifetime, I was 5 years old when ADA and IDEA come out. I'm now 40. This is just bonkers. Our kids shouldn't have less rights than we did. Their elders are behind them. They better not think it's just parents. They've got a whole community to contend with.
That's true. That is our power, is that we have generations of people who have grown up with different expectations and have kind of assumed that there is a promise that you're not going to be put in an institution and left there, that you have opportunity. It is noon. Who would like to go for lunch? See, we took 10 minutes. You took 10 minutes. Good.